What are you doing in this part of town? Just driving home from work, sir. You better start telling me the truth. I know you're the one that robbed the jewelry store. What? Officer, I swear I didn't do anything. I was just driving home. Sir, you need to calm down. I saw the police officer put a hand on his gun holster, and I remained quiet after that. Then the officer walked back over to the police cruiser, and I was able to hear him requesting backup through his radio. This is Officer Reynolds, requesting backup down on Main Street. I have the robbery suspect detained, and he's becoming aggressive. My name is Brandon Williams, and I'm a highly respected lawyer in my city. I've spent years fighting tirelessly for justice as a defense attorney, which has garnered me a more than trustworthy reputation in the local community. Over the course of my career, I've defended everyone from regular citizens all the way up to high-class aristocrats, using my sharp mind and unyielding dedication to the law to find the truth. I work as hard as I can to bring justice to my clients, and I'm well liked for it. That's why I was so surprised by the events of one summer evening. I was driving home from work after a long day in court, feeling a little tired, but still aware of my surroundings and following the traffic laws. Even when tired, I'm always mindful of my actions behind the wheel. On one of the streets I turned onto, I noticed red and blue lights coming from behind my car, and I saw a police car in my rearview mirror. Immediately, I got nervous. I knew I had done nothing wrong, and the police like to single out black people like myself. A couple seconds later, the officer's voice came out of the speakers. Driver in the sedan, pull over immediately. I pulled over as quickly and safely as I could and turned the car off as I waited for the officer to approach. My heart was racing. I'd been pulled over before, but only for small reasons, like when my taillight was broken or my license plates had expired. I could tell that this time was different. The officer appeared at my door, and I rolled down the window as I put on a straight face. Good evening, officer. Can I help you with something? Do you know why I pulled you over? I was nervous at the officer's commanding tone of his voice. I could tell that this wasn't just a regular traffic stop, and I don't know what I had done wrong. No, I don't. Is there a problem, officer? What are you doing in this part of town? Just driving home from work, sir. You better start telling me the truth. I know you're the one that robbed the jewelry store. What? Officer, I swear I didn't do anything. I was just driving home. Sir, you need to calm down. I saw the police officer put a hand on his gun holster, and I remained quiet after that. Then the officer walked back over to the police cruiser, and I was able to hear him requesting backup through his radio. This is Officer Reynolds, requesting backup down on Main Street. I have the robbery suspect detained, and he's becoming aggressive. Robbery? I didn't rob anyone. I was just driving through. My nerves worsened as I thought over what I'd done so far. After my day in court, I'd returned to my office to drop off a couple of files, and then I got in my car to head home. As far as I knew, I hadn't broken any traffic laws, and certainly nothing that required more cops to show up. So why was the officer accusing me of robbing a jewelry store? Only a few minutes later, and another police cruiser arrived at the scene. Officer Reynolds returned to my door, and his tone had become more aggressive than before. Step out of the car, Mr. Williams. Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I didn't rob anybody. Officer Reynolds ignored me and opened the door for me. At that point, I knew I had to comply, and I stepped out of the car. When I did, I got a good look at the second officer, who was younger and seemed to have less experience, and noticed that he looked nervous. His badge identified him as Officer Jacobs. Is this the robbery suspect? Definitely. Hands behind your back. Please, officer, I didn't do anything. Quiet. You're under arrest for grand theft.
What's going on?
That man's being arrested.
What did he do?
The officer keeps saying that he robbed a jewelry store nearby. Then he called for backup and put him in handcuffs.
So did he rob the store? I don't know. He keeps saying it wasn't him.
The group of people that had gathered around the scene looked worried for me, and some even questioned why the officers were arresting me, but nobody stepped in to help. Even though everyone could see I was pleading my innocence, I was on my own. Officer Reynolds placed me in the back of his patrol car, and I couldn't help wondering what had happened. Maybe Officer Reynolds had simply mistaken me for somebody else? Or was he targeting me specifically? The officers drove off, abandoning my car on the side of the road, and made their way to the police station. I kept silent on the drive. My legal expertise wouldn't help me in this moment of vulnerability. My rights had already been ignored, so reminding them of that wouldn't do me any favors. Not long after that, the patrol car pulled into the police station parking lot, and Officer Reynolds led me through the station into a small holding cell. Officer Jacobs joined Officer Reynolds, and they stood across the hall as they spoke in a hushed tone. They would keep glancing over at me, and I could tell that they were talking about my arrest. Something about it was wrong, and I got the feeling they were trying to get their side of the story straight. Officers, please, I didn't do anything. I wasn't anywhere near the store today. I was in court. I'm a defense attorney. The officers looked over when I mentioned being a lawyer, but they remained where they were and didn't answer my call. Excuse me, I want to make my phone call now. I need to speak to a lawyer. Neither officer responded to my calls, and I got more and more worried. If I couldn't get legal representation, I would be in a lot of trouble. The hours passed, and I felt my hope slowly draining. Did you hear? What? The police arrested Brandon Williams. That's not possible. What did he do? Onlookers were saying that the cops kept accusing him of the jewelry store heist earlier today. That's ludicrous. We have to do something for him.
And somebody already has. John Mitchell's on his way to the station to represent Brandon.
John Mitchell? He's one of the best defense attorneys out there. He'll be able to get him out of there for sure. I'm here to see my client, Brandon Williams.
Oh, you're representing him, are you? I'll see if he's available.
After several hours in the cell, one of the officers opened the door and escorted me to an interrogation room. I was surprised and relieved to see my colleague, John Mitchell, waiting for me. Thank you for coming, Mr. Mitchell. Of course. Now, what can you tell me about the events leading up to your arrest? Not much. I went to work, I spent the day in court, and after stopping by my office, I got into my car and started driving home. What happened after that? Well, Officer Reynolds pulled me over, accused me of robbing the jewelry store, and called for backup. Then he put the handcuffs on me and brought me here. This is highly irregular, Brandon. I don't see any valid reason for your arrest. We're going to get you out of here as soon as possible. As soon as he left the interrogation room, John immediately got to work trying to clear my name. He went to the other police officers and demanded answers as to why I was arrested, and didn't get any reasonable explanation. He'd also contacted the local news in order to bring attention to my situation and shine a light on what the police had done to me. Within hours, community leaders, civil rights activists, and other lawyers arrived at the station in protest of what had been done to me. Not long after that, the local news team arrived to report on the situation.
We're currently outside of the police station where local defense attorney Brandon Williams is currently being held. According to criminal defense attorney John Mitchell, Mr. Williams has done nothing wrong, despite the police arresting him for grand theft of the local jewelry store. It is currently thought that Mr. Williams was arrested simply because of his race. When we asked the officers responsible for comment, they declined to speak with us.
During the local news coverage, it had been discovered that Officer Reynolds had a history of racial profiling and misconduct. His actions on the day I had been taken to the police station were determined to be a gross abuse of power, and that my arrest was based solely on the color of my skin. Internal Affairs soon became involved and conducted a thorough investigation of Officer Reynolds and Officer Jacobs. They found that the actions of Officer Reynolds violated the policies in the department and civil rights, and he was fired from the police force as a result. Officer Jacobs, while he did not participate in my arrest, was suspended without pay for a substantial period of time due to his failure to report the misconduct or intervene. Once I was free and my name and reputation had been cleared, the mayor issued a public apology to me. They said my arrest was a glaring example of the systemic issues embedded within the police department, and that it would spark much-needed conversations about racial profiling and the way police abuse their power. The experience, while turbulent, reaffirmed my faith in the legal system and shows that justice will prevail. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I ran to him and pulled his shirt, begging him to talk to my mother, but he couldn't say a word. He stood at a spot, staring into nothing with tears streaming down his eyes. We begged my mother until she reached the gate.
Get away from me, you stupid things from a useless man.
She yelled and kicked us off carelessly. With the force she kicked us with, my sister got a terrible injury on her forehead that had blood gushing out of it. I ran back into the house as fast as my short legs could carry me, wailing. Hi there. My name's Alex. I am 30-year-old living in a serene part of Australia. My mother left my sister and I when I was only 7 years of age. My father was a gentleman. They got married 3 years before I was born. They'd both planned to start having kids immediately after marriage, but failed. The doctor said my mother was having a problem with her womb and had to be on medication. My father was fine with it. For 2 years, my mother was on medications. My father was patient. Even though he badly wanted kids, he endured with her until the doctor confirmed her to be fine. 1 year later, she got pregnant with me. You can tell that my father was the happiest man on earth to hear the news from her. 2 years after my birth, she took in for my sister, and 3 years later, she gave birth to my brother. A year after his birth, my mother began nagging terribly.
Why are you just returning from work? Don't you know your children and I need you?
My father always apologized. On days when he was home, he would spend all of his time with us. Still, my mother wasn't appreciative. Soon, he caught her cheating with a colleague of hers at the new place she began working at. Prior to that, she'd begun exhibiting even worse behaviors.
I work all day. Have you no ounce of pity for me, you stupid man?
On the day he caught her, they had a fight the previous night. I knew because their loud noises woke me up and I was forced to leave my room.
What have I not done for you, Jane? I've done everything I can to be a good husband and keep this family whole.
Oh, keep your sermons to yourself. What have you done that no other man hasn't? If you make me pissed, I'm gonna leave you.
I was scared to hear that threat. I rushed back to my room and buried my face in my small pillow, crying. The thought of my mother leaving us scared me. That fateful day, my father returned home looking utterly disorganized. His eyes also looked like mine whenever I cried so much, and that filled my small mind with worry. "Are you okay, Daddy?" He looked up at me with a smile and assured me that he was. In that heartbroken state he prepared dinner, fed us, gave us our night bath before putting us to sleep. 2 hours later, I woke up from a nightmare. I dashed out of my room and went to my parents', but no one was there. I went to the living room, only to see my dad sitting on the floor, still in his office clothes, tears rolling down his eyes. I couldn't go to him. I turned and headed back to my room. I would later come to know that after he caught them in her office, my mother had told him to his face that the man was the new person she loved, and he and his children could go kill themselves for all she cared. For 2 weeks, my mother didn't return home. Whenever we asked my dad, he would say she was on an important trip and would be back soon. 3 weeks later, she returned home with my father's parents.
I admit my mistakes. Please forgive me. I was out of my mind. I promise it will never repeat itself.
My grandparents also joined in pleading for my father's forgiveness. Eventually, he did. She returned home and quit her job. For the first 2 months, she was a great wife. She took care of us properly, spent more than enough time with us, and also became a loving wife to my father. We had no idea what she was planning. One night, while we were all watching a movie in the living room, my mother's phone rang. The call took barely 10 seconds. After the first word and an okay, she excused herself and left the living room. When she reappeared, she was with a bag and 2 boxes. My father was alarmed.
What are you doing, babe? Where are you going?
I'm leaving you, fool. I'm going to start my life with a man who cares for me.
My father was confused. He thought she'd changed. She suddenly grabbed my brother.
Just so you know, Jacob isn't your son. My son, his father, and I are going to start a new life of our own.
That night, we cried and pleaded with her, but she was bent on leaving. We were young, so the thought of separating with our mother and brother was too much for us. My father was dumbfounded. I ran to him and pulled his shirt, begging him to talk to my mother, but he couldn't say a word. He stood at a spot, staring into nothing with tears streaming down his eyes. We begged my mother until she reached the gate.
Get away from me, you stupid things from a useless man.
She yelled and kicked us off carelessly. With the force she kicked us with, my sister got a terrible injury on her forehead that had blood gushing out of it. I ran back into the house as fast as my short legs could carry me, wailing. Mother kicked Abby. She's crying blood from her head. My father snapped out of his shocked state and dashed out of the house. I grabbed his car keys and ran after him. We met my sister unconscious. It took a week before she finally woke up in the hospital. She lost a lot of blood. The fall nearly affected her brain. The wound left a huge scar on her forehead that made her insecure for years. We finally returned home after spending almost 4 weeks at the hospital. In tears, my father calmly explained the situation to us. Even in that moment, he pleaded with us to not hate our mother, but it was unacceptable for my sister and I. We despised her from that young age. 10 years later, while we were spending time with our father at a park, his phone suddenly rang. He was happy to see that the caller was my mother. He quickly called for our attention and answered the call, putting it on loudspeaker.
Hey, loser! I'm calling to tell you that I'm leaving the life I've always dreamed of. My extremely wealthy husband takes good care of my son and I. I hope you and your children continue wallowing in poverty.
I lost it there and was about to speak, but she hung up. My father wasn't poor, he wasn't rich, but we were satisfied with his level. How could she be so evil to him and us, her innocent children? My hatred for her increased even more. That call brought back all the emotions he'd been locking in, and my father fell into depression. He tried his best for 2 years to defeat it, but his best didn't seem enough. 3 years later, my father committed suicide. He left us an apology note and the password to the safe he'd been saving money for the past 20 years. Although we were devastated by the loss of our father, the wealth he left behind managed to console us. With that money, I made good investments and trained my sister and I throughout our education years. My mother returned, 8 years after my father died, looking old and haggard. According to her story, her husband and Jacob had died in a car accident. His real wife and his family came and sent her out with nothing. She begged for our forgiveness, and I accepted. My sister was furious, but I let her know that I have a plan. For 1 year, I ensured we both lived with my mother in the only mansion I had in America. We showed her all the love she could ask for and treated her better than she could ever imagine. After that year, I sold the house without her knowledge. I rounded up everything I had to do in America. One night, while all 3 of us were watching a movie, I got a call from my manager that my flight was ready. I signaled to my sister, and we both excused ourselves. We grabbed a bag and 2 boxes each, the remaining properties we had there, and walked back to the living room. My mother was surprised and asked where we were going. This was the same way you left us, years ago. The owner of this house and everything in it is coming tomorrow, so you better evacuate. The cars outside have all been sold. For your bank account, my manager has taken every penny I left there. We're leaving this country, and we pray to never see you again. Just like we did that night, my mother begged, nearly crying her eyes out. When we got to the gate, I pushed her, but she was lucky enough to land safely. We walked out, and my second manager was waiting by the gate with a car. We got in, and he drove off. I turned to catch a smirk on my sister's face. With a smile, I asked her if she's happy.
More than happy. I did something too. I figured your plan wouldn't be enough payback, so I planned mine. Yesterday, I injected her with HIV patient blood, telling her it will make her look younger, and she believed it. Then I later posted her pictures on social media with caption, "Beware of this sexy HIV patient."
Next day, I received a call from my neighbors, informing me that the following day, the property owners arrived, and my mother adamantly refused to leave. Unfortunately, the situation escalated, resulting in her being beaten. The police were subsequently called, leading to her arrest, and she's now facing a sentence for trespassing. Hope we did the right thing?